My name is Illyria Voss. I am 34 years old, and I have spent most of my life being invisible to the people who were supposed to see me first. I work as an IT manager. I live in Stockton, California, and as of 6 hours ago, Forbes published an article calling me a self-made millionaire with a $4.2 million IT business built from nothing. The morning that article went live, my father texted me for the first time in over a year. The message said, "Family dinner at 7, important, your mom is cooking." I read it 3 times, not because I did not understand the words, but because I needed a moment to register what it meant that the first contact from my father in 14 months arrived within hours of the most public recognition of my career. I texted back 2 words, "I will be there." And I meant it, not because I was hopeful, not because I thought anything had changed, but because I had been carrying something for 6 months that I had not yet had the right moment to put down. That dinner was the moment. Before I tell you what happened that night, I want to know where you are watching this from. Drop your city in the comments below. And if you have ever felt invisible in your own family, if you have ever built something real while the people closest to you looked the other way, hit that like button right now because this story is for you. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next, because I promise you, the ending is not what anyone at that dinner table expected. Let me take you back to where this really started. 3 years before that Forbes article, on a Friday evening in Riverside, California, I sat alone at a table for 5 at Carmen's restaurant and waited for my family to arrive. I had booked that table 2 weeks in advance. I requested a private room with a door that could close. I ordered flowers for the center of the table. I wrote a short speech on a note card and kept it folded in my jacket pocket. That evening marked the completion of 17 months of negotiation with reimagined Systems, a mid-sized technology conglomerate based out of Phoenix, Arizona. The contract I signed that afternoon was worth $800,000. It was the largest deal my company had ever closed, and I had built every piece of that relationship from a cold email I sent on a Tuesday morning with no introduction and no connection. I arrived at Carmen's at 6:30. By 7, no one had come through the door. By 7:20, my phone lit up with a message from my mother. She wrote, "Whiston just got a new position at your dad's company. We are all celebrating for him tonight. Cannot make it, sorry honey." That was the entire message. No question about how I was doing. No acknowledgement that I had invited them somewhere specific for a reason, just a redirect. I sat with that message for a few minutes. Then I called the waiter over, paid for the table reservation and the flowers in full, and walked out to the parking lot alone. On the drive back to Stockton that night, I did not cry. I did not call anyone. I got home, went straight to my desk, opened my laptop, and started drafting the implementation plan for the reimagined contract. I had a team to lead and a timeline to meet, and that was what I focused on. What I want you to understand is this. The position my family celebrated for Whiston that night was not a real job offer from an outside company. My father created the title himself inside Fincrest Ventures, the family business he had been running for years. There was no job description on paper, no defined responsibilities, no performance review process. My father decided on the salary number the same afternoon he created the role. Whiston had no management experience, no relevant credentials, and had not interviewed anywhere outside the family company. But that evening, my mother opened wine and my father made a toast, while I sat in a private dining room in Riverside with bread no one touched and a note card speech no one heard. That was not an isolated night. It was a pattern I had been living inside for decades, and it did not start with Whiston's fake promotion. I grew up in Riverside, California as the oldest of 3 children. When I was born, my parents were still figuring out money, figuring out their marriage, figuring out everything. By the time Whiston came along 4 years later, and Xander 3 years after that, the financial pressure had eased and my parents had settled into a rhythm. The rhythm just did not include me in the same way. From the time I was 12, I handled my own academic path. I researched scholarships myself, applied to summer programs in technology without being told they existed, and figured out how to get letters of recommendation by asking teachers directly. My parents did not discourage any of it. They also did not ask about it. My self-sufficiency was treated as a baseline, not as an achievement. It was simply the way things were, and no one thought to comment on it. When I was 17, I made it to the state finals of a competitive speech and debate program held in Sacramento. The event was more than 6 hours from Riverside by car. I had been preparing for 4 months. I sent my parents a printed invitation with the date, the venue, and the schedule. I confirmed with my mother 2 weeks before that she had seen it. She said yes. The morning of the finals, I took a bus to Sacramento with 3 other students from my school. I competed in front of judges I had never met, in a city I had never been to, without a single familiar face in the audience. I placed second in the state. After the award ceremony, I ate dinner alone at a sandwich shop near the hotel, then boarded an early bus back to Riverside the following morning. When I walked through the front door of our house, my father was watching television. He looked up and said, "You back already?" I told him I got second place in the state. He said, "Oh nice," and looked back at the screen. 4 years later, I graduated from UC Davis with a degree in computer science, summa cum laude. I sent my parents a formal invitation in the mail. I followed up with a text message. I asked my mother directly, 2 weeks before the ceremony, whether they were planning to come. She said she thought so. On the day of graduation, I put on my cap and gown at 6 in the morning and drove to the campus alone. I sat in the stadium with thousands of other graduates and their families. When my name was called, I walked across the stage, shook the dean's hand, and accepted my diploma in front of people I did not know. After the ceremony, I took a photograph of myself holding the diploma next to a tree on the quad. A stranger offered to take the picture for me, so I would not have to hold the camera myself. My mother texted me that afternoon. She explained that Xander, who was 14 at the time, had woken up with a low fever that morning, and she had decided to stay home with him. She did not ask how the ceremony went. I responded that it went well and put my phone in my bag. 6 years later, at 28, I went to Riverside specifically to meet with my father about a business loan. I had spent 3 years working inside other companies, learning the technical and operational side of running an IT services operation. I had identified a specific gap in the mid-market, and I knew how to fill it. I needed $10,000 to cover initial licensing costs and 3 months of operational runway while I built my first client contracts. I brought a printed business plan that was 31 pages long. I had projections, a competitor analysis, a client acquisition strategy, and a repayment schedule that showed my father getting his money back with interest within 18 months. I sat across from him at the kitchen table in Riverside and walked him through it section by section. He listened, he nodded in a few places. At the end he said, "Let me think about it." 2 weeks later, he called to say he did not have the money available right now. 1 month after that, I found out from Whiston that our father had transferred $35,000 into Whiston's personal account so that Whiston could try something with an online store. There was no business plan. There was no repayment agreement. The store sold home goods and lasted 4 months before Whiston shut it down. The $35,000 was never discussed again. I did not confront my father about it. I went to a local credit union, took out a $10,000 personal loan at a higher interest rate than I would have preferred, and started building. I worked a second job on evenings and weekends for the first 18 months to cover the loan payments while simultaneously acquiring my first clients. I told no one in my family what I was doing, not because I was hiding it, but because no one asked. The morning of the Forbes article, after I sent my 2-word reply to my father, I went about my workday as normally as I could. I had 2 client calls in the morning and a team check-in at 2 in the afternoon. I did not mention the article to my team, though 2 of them had already seen it and sent congratulations by text. At 4:30 my mother called. I answered. She said, "We are so proud of you, sweetheart. We always knew you had it in you." Her voice was warm in a way I had not heard in a long time. She asked how I was feeling, whether I had eaten, whether the drive from Stockton would be too much. I told her I would be there at 7. I left Stockton at 5:15, driving my 2016 Honda Civic South on the highway toward Riverside. I had not upgraded the car despite the change in my financial situation over the past few years. I had other priorities for the money, and the car ran well. The drive was about 90 minutes without traffic. I did not listen to music on the way down. I went over the plan in my head, not because I needed to rehearse it, but because I wanted to make sure every step was still in the right order. I had been holding this for 6 months. I did not want to rush it or lose my footing in the moment. I arrived at my parents' house in Riverside at 7 on the dot. My mother opened the door before I reached the porch. She was wearing a kitchen apron and smiling fully. My father appeared behind her, stepped forward and put his hand on my shoulder in a brief, firm way. He said, "There she is." Wystan and Xander were both already seated in the living room. Wystan said, "Congrats, Illyria." Xander gave a short wave and said, "Big deal." The dining table was set with care. There were flowers in a vase at the center, white candles on either side, and cloth napkins folded into neat rectangles beside each plate. My mother had made pot roast, which she knew had been my preferred meal as a child. There was also a salad, dinner rolls, and a side of roasted potatoes. I sat down and observed the scene without commenting on it. Dinner conversation in the first 30 minutes was surface level and steady. My father asked how things were going in Stockton, whether the city suited me, how large my team had grown. My mother asked if I was getting enough sleep, whether I was cooking for myself or eating out too much. Wystan asked how many contracts I was running simultaneously. Xander asked whether I had an office or worked from home. I answered each question directly and did not volunteer more than what was asked. I ate the pot roast. I complimented my mother on the potatoes. I refilled my own water glass. After the main course, my mother cleared the plates and brought out a pot of tea. My father waited until she sat back down before he shifted his posture and changed his tone. He said that he wanted to talk about something important and that he was glad I had come down because this was a conversation better had in person. He said that Fincrest Ventures had been going through a difficult stretch. Some of the investments the company had made over the past 2 years had not returned what was expected. There were outstanding obligations that had become harder to manage. The company needed capital to stabilize and restructure. He said the number out loud, $1.6 million. He described it as a family investment opportunity. He said I would be recognized as a shareholder. He said this was the kind of moment where a family pulls together, and that he had always believed we were that kind of family. My mother set her teacup down and nodded. She said that Fincrest had been part of our family for a long time, and that she knew I understood what that meant. She said my father had worked hard for many years, and that this was a difficult season for him. Wystan said he had several ideas for turning the company around, but needed resources to execute them. He said that with the right capital infusion, there was real potential to grow what Fincrest had started. Xander did not make an argument. He sat with his hands folded on the table and looked at me steadily. All 4 of them were looking at me. The table was quiet. The candles were still burning. I reached down and picked up my teacup. I took one sip, then I set it back on the saucer and looked at my father. I did not answer his request directly. Instead, I asked him one question. I said, "What is the total outstanding debt on Fincrest Ventures right now?" My father blinked once. He gave me a number. I nodded slowly, reached into my bag, and placed a white envelope on the table between us. Then I told him the truth. 6 months earlier, I had become aware through professional contacts that Fincrest Ventures was carrying significant debt across multiple lenders. The company had missed 2 scheduled payments to its primary creditor and was in early-stage default conversations with a secondary lender. I did not hear this from anyone in my family. I heard it because I work in a professional world where people talk, and the name Fincrest had come up in a conversation I was not expecting. After that, I spent 3 weeks doing research. I hired a financial consultant to help me assess the full picture. What I found was that the total debt load of Fincrest Ventures was real, it was serious, and it was accelerating. I then made a decision that I did not discuss with anyone in my family. I contacted the primary creditors of Fincrest Ventures directly. I introduced myself not as anyone's daughter, but as a private investor interested in acquiring distressed debt positions. Over the following 2 months, working through a holding company I had established under a name unrelated to my own, I purchased the outstanding debt obligations of Fincrest Ventures at market rate. Fincrest Ventures no longer owed money to those creditors. Fincrest Ventures owed that money to me. Every dollar of it. I told my father this in plain, direct language. I did not raise my voice. I did not pause for effect. I stated the facts in the same tone I would use in a client meeting. My father picked up the white envelope. He opened it and pulled out the document inside. It was a 2-page summary of the debt positions, the transfer dates, the holding company name, and the current balance owed. His eyes moved across the page. His face changed as he read, going from confusion to something slower and harder. My mother said, "What does it say?" She reached for the page and my father let her take it. She read the first paragraph and looked up at me. She said, "I do not understand what this means." I explained it again in simpler terms. I said, "Fincrest Ventures owes its debt to a company I own. I am not a potential investor. I am your current creditor." Whiston stood up from his chair, leaned over his father's shoulder and read the page himself. He sat back down without speaking. Xander looked at me and did not look away. He did not say anything either. The room was completely silent. My mother set the document on the table. My father stared at the surface of the tablecloth for a long moment. Then I took a second envelope from my bag and placed it on the table beside the first. I told my father there were two options. The first option: the family signs a transfer of operational control of Fincrest Ventures to my holding company. I take over management of the company, I handle the existing debt obligations through proper restructuring, and I ensure that the employees of Fincrest, including the ones currently waiting on delayed payroll, receive what they are owed. The Voss family retains no operational role. The second option: I proceed with the debt collection process through standard legal channels, with no special arrangements made because of the family relationship. The second envelope contained the transfer of control documents, already drafted by my attorney, ready to be signed. My father looked at me for a long time before he spoke. When he did, his voice was lower than it had been all evening. He said that this was not the way a daughter should treat her parents. He said that I was acting like they were strangers. He said that after everything, he had not expected this from me. I waited until he finished. Then I said, "I have been treated like an outsider for 34 years. Tonight I am simply being accurate about what that means." No one responded to that. 12 minutes passed. My parents spoke to each other quietly. Whiston looked at his phone. Xander kept his eyes on the table. Then my father picked up the pen I had placed beside the second envelope, and he signed the transfer document. My mother signed below his name. Neither of them looked at me directly while they were signing. I collected both envelopes, returned them to my bag, stood up, and thanked my mother for the meal. I said the pot roast was good. Then I walked to the front door, put on my jacket, and let myself out. No one followed me to the door. I walked to my Honda Civic, got in, and sat in the driver's seat for about 3 minutes without starting the engine. I was not processing what had just happened. I already knew what had happened. I had known for 6 months how that evening was going to end. I sat there because I wanted to give myself a moment to register that it was finished. Then I opened my phone and went to my contacts. I blocked my father's number. I blocked my mother's. I blocked Whiston. I blocked Xander. One by one, without hesitation, without a second thought, not in anger. The anger had left a long time ago. I did it because the conversation was over and I did not need a follow-up. I started the car and drove north on the highway back to Stockton. About 20 minutes into the drive, I turned on the radio and found a station playing something low and steady. I thought about the Fincrest restructuring plan I had already drafted in rough form. I thought about the employees who had been waiting weeks for paychecks they had earned. I thought about the meeting I had scheduled for 9 in the morning on Monday with my senior team in Stockton. I did not think about my father's face when he read the document. I did not think about what my mother said or did not say. Those things had already moved into a part of my memory that I did not plan to visit often. Here is what I want to say to you directly, because I think it matters. I did not win anything at that dinner table in the way people imagine winning. I walked into that house as a creditor, and I walked out as the person who now controlled a company my father had spent years building. That is not a victory I celebrate. It is a consequence that played out logically from decisions my family made over many years and decisions I made in response. What I did walk out with was something different. I walked out with the end of a long waiting period. I had spent decades in a version of myself that was always slightly turned toward that house in Riverside, slightly angled in the direction of people who never quite looked back. That night I turned away completely, not dramatically, not with a speech, just quietly, completely, and with full intention. The woman who came in second at a state speech competition in Sacramento at 17, who graduated summa cum laude from UC Davis with no one in the audience, who signed an $800,000 contract, and sat alone at a restaurant table with flowers and a note card. That woman built a $4.2 million company in 6 years without a single dollar of family support. And the only thing that changed the night Forbes published that article was that my family finally saw what I had already known for a long time. You do not need the people who should have believed in you to eventually come around. You need to stop adjusting your direction based on whether they are watching. That is the only thing I know for certain. Now I want to hear from you. If you have ever been the person in your family who built something real while everyone else was looking somewhere else, tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you know someone who is in the middle of that kind of silence right now, someone who is doing the work while their family misses every moment, share this video with them. It might be the thing they need to hear today. If this story stayed with you, please like this video. It takes 1 second and it tells me that what I put into these stories is worth continuing. And if you are not subscribed yet, please subscribe now. I share stories like this one regularly, and I do not want you to miss what comes next. Thank you for spending this time with me. Whatever you are building right now, keep going. The people who are supposed to see it will either show up or they will not, but the building does not stop either way.